Good evening, welcome to This Week in Turkey. Iranian-Turkish gold trader Reza ZARRAB did not attend a court hearing in New York on Thursday, raising suspicion that he may now be cooperating with U.S. authorities in search of a plea bargain deal.
Jailed Iranian-Turkish businessman Reza ZARRAB and his lawyer did not attend a court hearing in Manhattan on Thursday to discuss the case ahead of the trial, according to Hürriyet Daily News. The jury selection in the case is scheduled to begin next Monday, and the opening statements will be made on November 27th. In his absence, there are mounting press reports that ZARRAB may now be cooperating with the US authorities in search of a plea bargain deal. Ankara has learned that ZARRAB is in a good condition after the United States responded to a second official question by the Turkish authorities, Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu said on Thursday. Upon seeing news reports that ZARRAB had disappeared or his lawyers couldn't reach him, we asked about his whereabouts to US officials. Since there was no answer, our colleagues asked once again to the US Justice Department. They received the answer that he is in a good condition in terms of both health and security, Çavuşoğlu said. Previously, ZARRAB's name surfaced last week in US media reports about US President Donald Trump's former national security advisor Michael Flynn. Flynn, already a key person of interest in an investigation into the alleged Russian meddling in the US election, is also reportedly being investigated for alleged talks with Turkey on deporting ZARRAB in exchange for money. Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is examining a meeting between Flynn and senior Turkish officials that took place weeks after Trump won the presidential election. Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is examining a meeting between Flynn and senior Turkish officials that took place weeks after Trump won the presidential election, NBC News and the Wall Street Journal reported. Turkey and Flynn's lawyers have denied any such negotiations. ZARRAB, a gold trader with dual Turkish-Iranian citizenship, was arrested in March in Florida. Prosecutors charged him with conspiring to violate US sanctions and to help Iranian entities conduct hundreds of millions of dollars worth of financial transactions through US banks. 9 people have been criminally charged, but only ZARRAB and a banker from Turkey's Halkbank, Mehmet Hakan Atilla, are in US custody. Both deny the charges.
Our first guest via Skype tonight is Soner Çağaptay, who's the director of the Turkish program at the Washington Institute. Good evening, Mr. Çağaptay.
Hello, good to be here.
So there's been some dramatic developments regarding the Reza ZARRAB case currently going on in New York, as we've just heard in the previous news video. So I'd like to ask you tonight, how do you think this turn of events will have an impact on Turkish-American relations?
So I think that U.S.-Turkish relationship is already going through a very rough patch. There's a significant problem, which is that there's nearly zero confidence between the leaders and the country's foreign policy-making elites. The recent visa crisis we saw, where Turkey and U.S. mutually suspended visa applications for each other's citizens, is not the problem. It is the symptom of the problem, that the countries really do not trust each other. These are deep issues that go back to Turkey's policies in Syria, U.S.'s policies in Syria, and various other issues that have kind of undermined the U.S.-Turkish military relationship and the broader relationship for nearly 15 years. So it seems to me as if the relationship is, unfortunately, not resilient, although it has been resilient for many decades. I think it has lost its resilience in the last 2 years, and you're seeing a rise of significant anti-American sentiments in Turkey. Many Turks rightly take issue with continued U.S. cooperation with the YPG, the Kurdish group in Syria, against ISIS, because the YPG is also very closely connected to the PKK. In fact, it is an offshoot of the PKK. So I think all of that suggests that you have a really troublesome relationship basis to begin with. And if the decision in the ZARRAB case is one such that, let's say, it implicates Turkish officials, or if the judges decide that the ZARRAB or Turkish Halkbank violated Iran sanctions, and therefore there should be sanctions, targeted sanctions against Turkish institutions or political personalities, I think be the lowest in the relationship in terms of crisis we will have seen since the Cyprus War of 1970s, at the end of which the U.S. had slapped arms embargo on Turkey, and the relationship had taken a nosedive. I would say this is the most significant political conflict, potential political crisis in the issue for nearly over 5 decades.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Çağaptay. We're aware you're on a tight schedule, so thanks a lot for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for hosting me.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met Russian President Vladimir Putin in the Russian city of Sochi on Monday.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin met in the Black Sea resort of Sochi on Monday. Our relationship has been restored almost to its full capacity, Putin said ahead of the talks, adding that he was glad to see the Turkish leader. I am sure our meeting today will be very effective, Erdogan said. After the 4-hour meeting, Russian President Vladimir Putin described discussions with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as productive. The two leaders have also agreed to focus on a political solution in Syria, underlining the close coordination between the two countries that have played key roles in the Syrian conflict. In addition to Syria, Erdogan and Putin discussed several other bilateral issues ranging from joint counter-terrorism efforts to economic cooperation in the trade and energy sectors. Furthermore, a trilateral meeting on Syria among the presidents of Turkey, Russia and Iran will be held on November 22nd in Sochi, a Turkish presidential source has said. The participants will discuss developments in Syria and the recent state of the region, the same source said. According to Hürriyet Daily News, the Turkish, Iranian and Russian foreign ministers will meet this weekend in the southern Turkish province of Antalya in preparation for the leaders' summit in Sochi. Relations between Russia and Turkey soared badly after Turkish jets shot down a Russian warplane near the Syrian border in November 2015, but Putin and Erdogan have taken steps to mend ties since then.
The BBC has uncovered a secret deal that let hundreds of Islamic State militants and their families escape from Raqqa under the supervision of the US and British-led coalition and Kurdish-led forces who control the city.
The BBC released an exclusive report revealing the escape on October 12 of thousands ISIS fighters from Raqqa to an ISIS-held territory in the eastern part of Syria near the Iraqi border. According to the report, the militants were allowed to flee under an evacuation deal by joining a convoy to evacuate civilians from Raqqa. The convoy was monitored by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces with the help of the coalition. According to one of the drivers, the convoy was at least 6 kilometers long. It was made of 50 trucks, 12 buses, and 100 of the Islamic State group's own vehicles. It was loaded with thousands of Islamic State members and weapons. This wasn't so much an evacuation, it was the exodus of the so-called Islamic State, states the BBC document. After the publication of the BBC investigation, the coalition admitted to having played a part in the deal. But Colonel Dion, spokesman for Operation Inherent Resolve, the Western coalition against ISIS, said it didn't take an active part in the discussions and that the deal was between the Syrian Democratic Forces and ISIS. However, according to some locals, the coalition aircrafts were lighting up the convoy and the road ahead. The coalition now admits that it monitored the convoy from the air. But surprisingly, despite the BBC investigation, even the SDF still denies that there was a deal. After ISIS left, the local population in the formerly ISIS-controlled territories is still worried. It will take us a while to rid ourselves of that psychological fear. We feel that they may be coming back for us or will send sleeper agents. We're still not sure that they've gone for good. According to smugglers, many foreign fighters and also Syrians are trying to reach Turkey. The smugglers now charge $600 per person. We had an influx of families over the past few weeks. There were some large families crossing. Our job is to smuggle them through. We've had a lot of foreign families using our services. Senior ISIS members usually use their own smuggling networks, but they sometimes get caught anyway. Abu Musa Abu Taifa, one of Raqqa's most notorious figures and the ISIS intelligence chief who was in the convoy, is now behind bars. But many battle-hardened ISIS fighters have spread across Syria and beyond.
In Freedom House's 2017 Freedom in the World report, Turkey's freedom status is marked as partly free.
In Freedom House's 2017 Freedom in the World report, Turkey's freedom status was marked as partly free. The assessment of the political and social developments that have occurred during 2016 shows that Turkey's freedom ratings have substantially declined. In the annual report released in January, Turkey's political rights rating declined from 3 to 4, its civil liberties rating declined from 4 to 5, and it received a downward trend arrow due to the political repercussions of the attempted coup in July last year, which led the government to declare a state of emergency and to carry out mass arrests and firings of civil servants, academics, journalists, opposition figures, and other perceived enemies. In the category of political rights, in which electoral process, political pluralism and participation, and the functioning of the government were assessed, Turkey regressed a total of 6 points. On the other hand, in the category of civil liberties, in which freedom of expression and belief, associational and organizational rights, rule of law, and individual rights were evaluated, Turkey lost 9 points. Moreover, according to the report, in the last 10 years, Turkey regressed a total of 28 points. This is the second biggest decline in the world after the Central African Republic.
Joining us from New York to talk about the current state of rights and freedoms in Turkey is Nate Schenkkan, who's a Turkey analyst at Freedom House. Good evening, Mr. Schenkkan. Welcome to Mediascope TV.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So what are the Freedom in the World and Freedom on the Net reports published by your organization, Freedom House? What do these reports and surveys measure and investigate?
So Freedom House has 3 different annual reports that work on Turkey: Freedom in the World, Freedom of the Net, and Freedom of the Press. Freedom in the World is a global report that focuses on the experience of an individual's rights and freedoms within a particular territory. So in the case of Turkey, we're looking at what is that individual able to do? How are their rights restricted? In the negative sense, so are they restricted by the state? Are they restricted by non-state actors? And also in the positive sense, how much are they able to enjoy their rights? How much are they able to participate fully in the public sphere, participate in politics, to associate, to assemble, and to speak freely?
So, Mr. Schenkkan, let's start with the 2017 Freedom in the World report, which is titled Populists and Autocrats, the Dual Threat to Global Democracy. And before we get to how Turkey has scored in this survey and report, could you give us a brief summary of the key findings of the report?
Sure. The report overall is looking at a broader global trend that's been continuing for more than a decade of democratic recession, of turning away from some of the strongest protections of democracy in the liberal democratic definition that were established over many decades, not only in the West but around the world. And Turkey has been one of the leading sources of that recession, democratic recession, in the world. Turkey has had one of the worst track records in freedom in the world out of the almost 200 countries and territories that we measure.
And how exactly does Turkey score in this report? And what are some of the main problem areas that you've found?
So Freedom in the World is a report that's divided into 2 main sections: political rights and civil liberties. So it's important for people who are reading that report or thinking about it to understand this is a certain definition of freedom, a certain definition of rights. That's about political rights, that's about civil liberties. We don't look at social rights, we don't look at economic rights. Within that, in Freedom in the World, Turkey currently scores as partly free. So we divide into 3 different big lump categories: free, partly free, and not free. Turkey scores at the lower end right now of the partly free category. So out of a 100-point scale, Turkey is now at 38 And so you can imagine Turkey's actually quite close at this point to the not free part of the scale. And the way Freedom in the World works is that it covers a calendar year. So the score I'm talking about here only covers events through the end of 2016. And actually right now, Freedom House and its advisors and experts are working on producing the new edition of Freedom in the World. That'll be released in early 2017 in January. And at that time, we'll find out what Turkey's new score is.
So, Mr. Schenkkan, before we start talking about the other report, which is the Freedom on the Net report, let's keep you on the line and let's have a look at our news video on this report specifically.
US-based non-governmental organization Freedom House has published its 2017 Freedom on the Net report this week. The report is titled "Manipulating Social Media to Undermine Democracy." According to the findings of the report, online manipulation and disinformation tactics played an important role in elections in at least 18 countries over the past year. Disinformation tactics contributed to a 7th consecutive year of overall decline in internet freedom, as did a rise in disruptions to mobile internet service and increases in physical and technical attacks on human rights defenders and independent media. A record number of governments have restricted mobile internet service for political or security reasons, often in areas populated by ethnic or religious minorities. For the 3rd consecutive year, China was the world's worst abuser of internet freedom, followed by Syria and Ethiopia. According to the report, of the 65 countries surveyed, 30, including Venezuela, the Philippines and Turkey, were found to be using armies of opinion shapers to spread government views, drive particular agendas, and counter government critics on social media. In each of the 30 countries, it found strong indications that individuals are paid to distort the digital information landscape in the government's favor without acknowledging sponsorship. Recently, this practice has become significantly more widespread and technically sophisticated, with bots, propaganda producers, and fake news outlets exploiting social media and search algorithms to ensure high visibility and seamless integration with trusted content, the report says.
Welcome back, Mr. Schenkkan. So let's start talking about the Freedom on the Net report now. In a nutshell, what are the key findings of your report this year?
So Freedom on the Net is another global report that Freedom House produces about freedom and how it's experienced on the internet. It includes 3 different categories of measures. These are obstacles to access, limits on content, and violations of user rights. So it's broken down into these 3 different areas. This year, one of the big findings was the increasing use of online manipulation and disinformation tactics spreading now throughout the world. These are things that Freedom House has been tracking for a long time throughout the life of the Freedom on the Net report. But in this year, we really saw those escalate and spread to more countries and have broader impact. So you see this now in 18 different elections that took place around the world. You saw social media manipulation and disinformation campaigns. We saw armies of what we're calling opinion shapers. You might call them troll armies or bot armies in some cases, being deployed in 30 different countries. So there's a lot of global trends right now about this kind of, let's say, softer shaping of the internet as a public discussion space. And this is building on a platform of much harder forms of censorship in many countries, where you might have arrests, legal penalties, and even violence against those who use social media and use online forms of communication.
And how did Turkey perform according to this year's Freedom on the Net report?
Turkey was one of 3 countries with the largest declines in this year's Freedom on the Net, so along with Ukraine and Egypt. Turkey ranks as not free in the Freedom on the Net survey. So that puts it in that kind of bottom category, and it's been there now for 2 years. The major changes, the major things that dropped Turkey's score this year were in limitations on content. Of course, Turkey has a long track record of blocking websites, of blocking social media accounts, of filtering social media, but that really escalated in this coverage period, which ran through June 2017. So following the coup attempt in July 2016, of course, you had a lot of media sites being blacklisted and being closed by executive decrees that included then taking down their online presences, which reverberates, in our report. And we also had a lot of violations of user rights in the form of people being arrested, detained, and put in prison. In some cases, sentenced to prison sentences for using social media and participating online in the public sphere. And in addition, it's always a busy agenda in Turkey. In addition, we had a lot of throttling, a lot of cases where internet and mobile access was cut off, sometimes for specific services, so Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, being shut down around politically sensitive events or around terrorist attacks, and sometimes sections of the country, mostly in the southeast, being shut down around military operations, or when the trustees started being assigned to the mayorships in the southeast, we had big shutdowns in the southeast where mobile, fixed, and other kinds, satellite internet connections were shut down for entire regions for quite a long period of time.
So, Mr. Schenkkan, according to this year's Freedom on the Net report, of the 65 countries surveyed, 30, including Venezuela, the Philippines, and Turkey, were found to be using, and you've already referred to these, I quote, armies of opinion shapers to spread government views, drive particular agendas, and counter government critics on social media. And in the report, this is termed as astroturfing. So can you explain what the astroturfing procedure is and how it's done in Turkey in particular?
Sure. So astroturfing is this kind of American term, I guess, that's a play on words. We call things grassroots campaigning when it's authentic, genuine campaigns mobilized from the bottom up. So astroturfing is when you create a fake grassroots campaign. And that's really a version of what we see online. What it looks like in Turkey, and we've learned this from a variety of sources that are probably familiar to Mediascope viewers, including the hacked emails of Berat Albayrak. What this looks like in Turkey is a coordinated, top-down campaign organized by the government that involves graphic designers, it involves social media managers, it involves troll farms, it involves political consultants, helping to set the agenda for how the online space should be driven on a particular day or week or month. Sometimes this can take the form of what I know in Turkey they call lynching campaigns, coming after specific people, especially celebrities or journalists who have somehow crossed the government. Sometimes it can take a more promotional form, promoting a government line and supporting what the government is trying to do. I think anyone who spends time in Turkish social media, on Twitter or on Facebook, is pretty familiar at this point with the way in which certain topics and certain items can quickly get turned into subjects for bots and troll campaigns. And the fact is that in Turkey, this is something now very widespread, very well organized, and very much directed and pursued from the top. And that's a change from where I would say the Erdogan government and President Erdogan were 3-4 years ago, when their perception and their approach to the online space and to social media was, we need to eradicate it. We need to destroy it. Like President Erdogan said in 2014, we're going to tear this Twitter schmitter out by the roots. It's a different approach now. We're going to control social media. We're going to direct it to our ends. We're going to use it because it's very powerful and we have control over it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schenkkan, for joining us tonight and for your informative comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nationalist Movement Party MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli has pledged full support for the ruling AKP in the upcoming 2019 elections.
MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli has pledged his full support for the ruling AKP in the 2019 elections, after which a shift is expected to occur from the current parliamentary system into an executive presidency. Our party, together with the AKP, will struggle for the full establishment of the presidential system in 2019 in line with the conscience of August 7th and April 16th, Bahçeli told his parliamentary group on Tuesday. On August 7, 2016, Turkey's three political parties gathered at a rally held under the leadership of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to jointly condemn the July 15 coup attempt in a show of unity and solidarity against the Fethullahist terrorist organization. On the other hand, on April 16th, a constitutional referendum was held throughout Turkey to decide whether the country should keep its current parliamentary system or become an executive presidency. The AKP and the MHP voted in favor of the changes, while a no bloc consisting of the main opposition, CHP, the People's Democratic Party, HDP, and a group of dissidents within the MHP. If the CHP and the HDP form a new bloc and attempt to seek revenge of the April 16th referendum, then the MHP will not remain silent and idle. We will struggle for the establishment of a new system with the AKP, Bahçeli said. Moreover, Bahçeli repeated his party's view over an ongoing debate on the current 10% electoral threshold in Turkey. Denying claims that MHP has been worrying about falling below the electoral threshold, Bahçeli insisted MHP had no barrier problem despite the results of the recent polls. It is not because we are concerned about the threshold, but we have shared our opinions over the fact that the governance system has changed and it's obliged us to revise the election system. An executive presidency system will introduce stability in governance, Bahçeli said.
Now let's have a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
The Istanbul Theatre Festival will host tomorrow French choreographer Angeline Préjogjas' La Fresque. This performance, which is based on two travelers and the Chinese monks cast for a fresco, is taught through a dazzling fusion of classical ballet and contemporary dance. Composer Nicolas Godin and fashion designer Azedine Alaya join Préjogjas in this dynamic performance. Le Grand Portrait de Nader kicked off Wednesday at French Institute. The exhibition is composed of about 40 silver prints on albumen paper and realized by the Jeu de Pont, Paris, in collaboration with the Media Library of Architecture and Heritage, Ministry of Culture and Communication, with the assistance of French Institute in Turkey. Gaspard Félix Tournachon, aka Nader, is one of the most important portraitists of the Second Empire. He was able to fix with extraordinary psychological finesse the faces of various celebrities, artists, scientists, politicians such as Delacroix, Georges Sand, Baudelaire, Victor Hugo, Sarah Bernhardt, and many others.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.